Hello everybody and welcome to the Tuesday edition of Video Clips. And I have to start by showing you my proud baby, Food Over Medicine in hardback. It is available now. They're shipping them, I believe, starting today, actually, June 11th. This is my first hardback book. I'm very, very excited. I was in New York last week signing books at the Book Expo. And we ran out of books. We had so many people that wanted books, we ran out of books, so that was kind of exciting for me. But anyway, Food Over Medicine, the conversation that can save your life. And that kind of will tie in with some of the things I want to talk about both today and on Thursday. You know, the whole purpose of these video clips is to examine the science and the latest studies and what everybody's talking about and kind of dissect this and report it to you in a way that makes it usable. But before we get into all that, just a couple of quick announcements. Tonight, Dr. Pam Popper is doing a conference call for us on achieving mental and emotional health without drugs. You know, this is another continuing theme I've been working on for a long time here at the Wellness Forum to raise awareness that these drugs are harmful, useless, and there are better ways to deal with psychological issues. I don't even like to call it mental and emotional issues anymore. I mean, I just think sometimes people have psychological issues they need to sort out. There are effective ways to do this. Dr. Work is going to talk about those things and she'll take your questions. And then next Tuesday, I'm doing an Ask Dr. Pam conference call on increasing your energy. So if you're feeling like you have more day than you have energy to fill it with, then tune into that call. All right. So I've got two topics I want to talk about. Again, back to the concept of food over medicine, the conversation that can save your life. Let's look at some recent scientific studies that I think are impactful for the American public. And the first one concerns mammography, something I've been talking about for a long time. I've been saying, you know how we just say no to drugs? Just say no to mammography, and here's a new study that'll tell you why. This one included data from 1976 through 2008 that looked at the incidence of both early stage and late stage cancer in women age 40 and older. And it shows that, you're not going to be surprised, mammography hurts more women than it helps. The researchers determined that the detection of early stage breast cancer doesn't reduce the detection of or the diagnosis of late stage cancer. That's why mammography doesn't reduce your risk of dying of cancer. They also reported that 1.3 million women were diagnosed with tumors during this period of time that never would have turned into anything clinically significant that would have required treatment. We call these ductal carcinoma in situ, or DCIS. In 2008 alone, 70,000 women were overdiagnosed. That's a lot of American women. Overdiagnosis, according to these researchers, accounts for 31% of all breast cancer diagnoses in this country. Now, this confirms the findings of the Cochrane collaboration. You might recall last summer I did a very long series on Peter Gotchi's book called Mammography, Truth, Lies, and Controversy. And Cochrane's been reporting for many years that mammography hurts more women than it helps. In addition to, and here's the thing, we've got 1.3 million women who were overdiagnosed here, but in addition to these women who were subjected to surgery, sometimes chemotherapy, radiation, follow-up drug treatment, labeled as breast cancer patients, we had millions more women who were subjected to follow-up mammograms in response to false positives. Now, I covered a study not too long ago showing that the stress associated with a false positive is just as high and persists for just as long as the stress associated with the diagnosis of breast cancer. And so, and I've covered another study showing that radiation used to treat breast cancer, and in this case, 1.3 million women who really didn't have it, is a leading cause of death from heart disease, and is one of the leading causes of death in breast cancer patients. And you can refer to the Health Briefs online library if you want to see those articles and look at those studies. But in spite of this, mammography continues to be a required free preventive service, which must be included in the list offered by insurance companies. And my gosh, we're never going to make any progress in helping Americans get healthier or reducing costs when we insist that people engage in activities that are useless and harmful and not really pay attention to the things that are helpful. If you don't want to get breast cancer, eat a health-promoting diet. It's your best protection. And of course, the American Cancer Society hasn't changed its stance. It doesn't matter how many of these types of studies we put in front of those people, they're not going to change their mind. So anyway, again, the message here, if you're female, just say no to mammography screening. I'm not getting mammograms, and I recommend that other women don't as well. All right, the other thing I want to talk about, which is a continuing issue, is this issue of salt. According to a recent report issued by the Institute of Medicine, scientific evidence doesn't support reducing salt consumption down to the levels recommended by both the United States government and other health authorities. For a very long time, doctors have said, and I always love how doctors say with a great deal of authority, that restricting salt intake to 1,500 milligrams a day, which is about a half a teaspoon, would prevent heart attacks and strokes for people at higher risk of cardiovascular events. Now, the at-risk population, according to your average cardiologist, is anybody older than 50, African Americans, people with high blood pressure. It's about half the United States population. Big number of people we're trying to get to consume virtually no salt. The IOM report, developed by an expert committee, found no reason for anybody to reduce salt consumption below 2,300 milligrams a day. And basically, this just confirms the findings of a bunch of other studies I've covered. And again, you can access the articles in the Health Briefs online library, showing that not only is salt restriction not helpful, but restricting salt to the levels that your average cardiologist and the American Heart Association recommend can actually increase the risk of the very events it's supposed to prevent, like heart attacks and stroke and death. The committee's work didn't include determining an ideal level or upper safe limits. They just reviewed the literature to see if salt restriction was a good idea. Now, Dr. McDougall's been advising people to salt their food if they choose to for a very long time, and he's been citing studies. In fact, my original readings on this topic were spurred on by him. I looked at the articles he was citing, basically showing that it's very hard to find evidence that salt is the primary culprit in hypertension. He also states that we have taste receptors for salt on our tongues for a real good reason, because humans are supposed to consume some salt. And Dr. McDougall's been citing studies, and there are some of these in the Health Briefs online library, showing that in other parts of the world where hypertension and cardiovascular events are much, the risk is much lower, that salt consumption is much higher. So bottom line is, we're not going to get any better at helping people to improve their health as long as we keep looking for, angels and villains, I call it. We're looking for magical nutrients in foods that are going to solve our problems, or we're trying to villainize a single nutrient or a single food that's causing all of our problems, and it's the dietary pattern. Now, I do want to say this. The average person in our country is consuming too much sodium, but when people consume a wellness forum style diet, their sodium consumption goes down. They're not eating all the junk food, the dairy gets out of the diet. At the same time, the consumption of other nutrients like magnesium and potassium goes up, and there's some evidence to indicate that this is just as important as salt coming down a little bit. But the bottom line is, there's no reason for further restriction for most people. I mean, you get a handful of people every year that really need to salt restrict in order to keep their blood pressure low, but that's not most people. The Institute of Medicine's report reverses an earlier opinion on this issue, and the report acknowledges the limitations in the previous reviews determining that salt restriction might have been a good idea. They basically said it's difficult to evaluate dietary patterns. Self-reported information from people is often not accurate. But the other thing that I thought was interesting is the definition of high salt intake in previous reviews varied so much as to be meaningless, and it ranged from 2,700 milligrams to 10,000 milligrams a day. Well, obviously, with that moving target, it's very difficult to identify salt as the major culprit in hypertension. Now, this probably isn't going to change dietary recommendations. You know, my colleagues aren't too interested in basing their recommendations on research. I hate to say that. And the American Heart Association already issued a statement saying they're not going to change their mind or their recommendations, and I'm not surprised at that. They don't change their mind or their recommendations in response to any other evidence. I guess changing it in response to this would just be too much to ask. So, anyway, that's all I have for today, but I'll be back to you on Thursday. In the meantime, pass this on to anybody who you think might enjoy watching it, and get to Amazon.com or to your local bookseller and order or pick up Food Over Medicine today. Have a great day.